The hallway outside conference room 12A was colder than usual. The kind of manufactured chill that settles into your bones before you realize you've stepped into the wrong temperature, the wrong hour, the wrong moment. I pushed open the glass door at 7:42 a.m., expecting the usual. A quiet room, dim lights, the faint hum of the ceiling projector warming awake. Instead, there were voices. Soft, intimate ones. Adrian's laugh, the one he used when he was performing warmth, floated across the table like perfume. And beside him, in my chair, sat a woman I had never seen before. She wore a pale peach blouse, hair meticulously curled, one manicured hand draped over a binder thick enough to imitate authority. Her smile was the kind that introduces itself before she does. "Oh," Adrian said, straightening his posture as if I had interrupted something personal. "Elena, you're early." I glanced at the wall clock. 18 minutes before the meeting's official start time. My usual. "I wasn't aware this room was booked," I replied, taking in the table setup. Printed agendas, color-coded tabs, 2 cups of coffee, neither mine. Adrian gestured lazily toward the woman. "This is Sabrina. She'll be taking over your responsibilities on the renewal initiative." The sentence slid out so effortlessly that for a moment I wondered if I had misheard. My responsibilities. The initiative I had secured, drafted, defended through 14 revisions and 1 near cancellation. The project I had shaped into a $12 million federal partnership. "Taking over?" I repeated, my voice level, almost gentle. Sabrina extended a hand toward me, palm soft, expression softer. "I'm excited to collaborate," she said sweetly, though nothing in her tone suggested collaboration was expected or desired. I didn't shake her hand. Instead, my eyes drifted to the binder opened in front of her. A funding document. The header in bold, Quarterly Disbursement Authorization. Below it, in neat black print, authorized signatory, Elena Marlowe. Not Sabrina, not Adrian, me. The detail sat quietly on the page, unnoticed by the 2 people so eager to erase me that they hadn't bothered to understand the basic mechanics of the program they were trying to steal. Adrian cleared his throat. "Elena, we'll have you transition tasks by end of week. Sabrina already has fresh ideas, and we want to move quickly. Efficiency is key." I nodded once, not in agreement, in acknowledgement of the moment, of the shift, of the crisp edge of humiliation pressing lightly, deliberately against my ribs. Sabrina's smile widened, bright enough to suggest she believed she'd won something. "They said you're wonderful at documentation," she added, as if complimenting a secretary from the 1960s. "I'm sure you'll make the transition smooth." The projector flickered to life on the far wall, painting both of them in pale blue light. I stepped back, letting the door close behind me with a soft, almost gracious click. In the corridor, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and indifferent. My pulse slowed. Breath steadied. Something quiet settled inside me. Not anger, not shock. Clarity. Because in that brief, accidental glimpse at the document, I had seen the one detail that mattered. They could replace my seat. They could replace my title. But the funding? The legal authority? They couldn't move a single dollar without my signature. I walked toward my office, calm, composed, each step deliberate. If they wanted efficiency, I would give them exactly that. The efficiency of consequences arriving on time. The storm hadn't started yet, but the air had shifted, and I had already begun taking notes. By Monday, everyone knew her name. You can measure the spread of information in an office by the way people stop talking when you walk in. That morning, as I stepped out of the elevator with my usual black coffee and unreadable expression, the conversation in the open plan area folded in on itself like paper. Screens lit up. Headphones suddenly mattered. The only voice that didn't dim was Sabrina's. Her laugh floated over the cubicles, chirpy, polished, expensive. The kind of laugh that belongs at rooftop bars and investor dinners, not next to the printer jammed with quarterly reports. "Adrian, you're bad," she giggled somewhere near his office. "You didn't tell me it would be this easy to fit in." Easy. That word hung in the air like cologne. I walked to my office, glass walls, lower corner, good view of the river and the emergency exit. When I'd first gotten this space 3 years ago, Adrian called it a recognition of your essential contributions. Now, my essential contributions were apparently transferable to a woman who still didn't know where the compliance drive lived. I set my coffee down, opened my laptop, and watched the small red number on my inbox climb as the morning sync finished. New calendar invites, new channels, new threads. I clicked the first invite. Project renewal, strategy sync, revised attendance. Attendees, Adrian, host, Sabrina, lead, finance, legal. Optional, Elena. Optional. I stared at that one word for a full 5 seconds until the letters blurred, then reformed. Optional wasn't a scheduling term. It was a verdict. The next email was from Adrian. Subject, transition support. Elena, to streamline things, please forward Sabrina all existing documentation, contact lists, and draft reports related to renewal. No need for you to attend every call going forward. We want to respect your bandwidth. A. Respect my bandwidth. A delicate way of saying, become an attachment. I replied with a single line. Noted. I'll ensure documentation is complete and up to date. It read like compliance. It was not. I opened the shared renewal folder, duplicated it to a private drive, then began to audit my own work as if I were a stranger investigating a system. Contracts, email threads with the agency, risk registers. Every memo where Adrian had written "we" over decisions I had carried alone. I wasn't protecting myself yet. I was confirming the perimeter. By mid-morning, Sabrina drifted past my office, pausing at the door like a visiting dignitary. She tapped lightly on the glass. "Hey, Elena, got a sec?" I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Of course." She entered, perfume first, tablet in hand. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, crossing her legs. "Adrian's told me how much you've done getting renewal to this point." So he had spoken about me. Good to know. "That's kind of him," I said, folding my hands. "What can I help you with?" She tilted her head. "I saw your name all over the grant contract. Impressive. Those compliance schedules look intense." "They are," I agreed. "We're under federal audit requirements. Every disbursement is contingent on documented oversight." "Right." She waved it away like a fruit fly. "Adrian said you're very detail-oriented." In my experience, detail-oriented was what people called you when they needed your precision but resented your memory. "I try to be," I said. She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Honestly, I'm relieved you're staying on to support. Adrian said you'd, make sure everything gets signed off." I watched her expression closely. "Signed off?" "Yeah." She scrolled through her tablet. "The disbursement authorization thing? I saw your name, but Adrian said it's just a formality. You'll approve whatever we agree to." My name. Just a formality. I smiled, small and neutral. "Adrian's very confident." She laughed like I'd complimented him. Well, he is the one who convinced the agency to trust us with this. That was my first real tell. She didn't understand the origin story. She knew what she'd been told, not what was true. After she left, my phone buzzed. A message from Sarah in finance. Did you know Sabrina's been added as cost center owner for renewal? Thought that was you. I typed back under my desk. Interesting. Keep me posted on any changes to funding workflows? There was a pause, then, always. Also, rumor says she's not just new hire, she's Adrian's new hire, if you know what I mean. Girlfriend. The word didn't need to be written. It was already printed in the way he laughed around her, in the way her hand hovered a little too familiarly near his sleeve. I locked my screen, lifted the original grant contract out of my drawer, and flipped to the sections most people skimmed. Section 4.2, Program Governance. Primary Program Director, Elena Marlowe. Any change in primary program management requires A. Written consent of the current program director, and B. Formal notification to the agency within 10 business days, and C. Updated signature authority submitted and accepted. Underneath, my signature, blue ink, dated. 3 agency counter-signatures, legal's stamp. You can fake power in a meeting. You can't fake ink. By the end of the day, I'd been removed from 2 renewal Slack channels, downgraded to optional on 3 more calls, and CC'd on an email where Adrian wrote, Sabrina will handle it from here. Every small erasure slid into a folder on my desktop named, simply, Record. People think revenge is loud. I've never had the luxury of loudness. What I had was time and the habit of documentation. The quiet discipline of not reacting where someone could measure your pain. As I shut down my computer that evening, I caught our reflection in the glass. Sabrina down the hall, laughing at something Adrian had said, his body angled too closely toward hers, their silhouettes overlapping like a careless Venn diagram. I watched them for a moment, then turned off the light in my office. They thought they were writing me out of the story. They hadn't read the part where my signature controlled the ink. The quarterly department review was always a performance, a meticulously choreographed ritual where Adrian narrated our achievements as if he'd personally architected each one. I used to sit near the front, adding quiet clarifications when necessary. This time, I chose the back row. It wasn't humility, it was vantage. The conference hall buzzed with the low-frequency hum of pre-meeting chatter. Screens flickered to life, projecting Adrian's name in a larger font than the department's title. Sabrina hovered near him in a pale blue dress that matched the color palette on the agenda slide. "Welcome, everyone," Adrian said, tapping the mic with unnecessary force. "Let's make this quick, lots to cover, and Sabrina has some exciting updates." The emphasis on her name drew a ripple of glances. A junior analyst whispered, "She's presenting?" Her supervisor hushed him. Sabrina stepped forward with the poise of someone who had never once worried about being prepared. "Thanks, Adrian," she beamed. "I've been diving deep into project renewal, and I'm thrilled to share the direction we're taking." We. She clicked to the next slide. Renewal 2.0, Strategic Reframing. Bullet points sparkled in corporate-friendly optimism. Outdated processes, overcomplicated oversight, inefficient gatekeeping. Gatekeeping. An interesting word to describe legally mandated compliance. I waited. The storm hadn't landed yet. Halfway through the presentation, Sabrina stumbled over a metric, the regulatory performance threshold required to maintain grant eligibility. She misquoted it by 12%, a dangerous margin, a fatal one contractually. Adrian stepped in, smiling in that patronizing way he reserved for people he thought were beneath him. "Don't worry, she's still learning the intricacies. Elena used to get these wrong too." I didn't flinch. I didn't look away, but the room did. A small silence followed. Not dramatic, but sharp, like the moment before a paper cuts skin. I rose halfway from my chair. "Correction," I said evenly. "We've never missed that metric. It's the reason we secured renewals expansion last year." Adrian waved a hand in my direction without turning. "Elena, please, not necessary." His voice carried the practiced warmth of someone redirecting a child at a family dinner. I sat back down. Not because I accepted the dismissal, but because the next slide caught my eye. Projected across the wall was a flowchart labeled Funding Disbursement Pathway. At the bottom right corner, marked in soft gray, Required Authorization, Program Director Signature. There it was again. My name on the process map. My role embedded into the architecture. Sabrina, oblivious, continued. "Once the first quarter funds are released, we'll begin phase..." Adrian cut in. "And we expect that release by Friday. No delays." I almost admired the confidence. A hand rose from the finance section, Sarah's. "Just confirming, has the authorization packet been signed?" Adrian chuckled lightly. "It's automatic. Elena's always been fast with those." Every head turned toward me. This was the moment humiliation typically blooms, when eyes press in, waiting to watch someone shrink. I didn't shrink. I uncrossed my legs, stood up, and spoke with the controlled cadence of someone reading a verdict. "The authorization isn't automatic," I said. "It requires compliance verification, documentation review, and the signature of the program director, which has not been requested." Sabrina blinked. "Oh, I thought..." Adrian snapped. "Elena, we'll handle that after the meeting." I didn't sit back down. I held the room's attention with nothing but stillness. "The agency requires that the current program director formally transfer oversight," I added. "Written consent, filed change order, and an updated authority registry. None of that has happened." A murmur spread through the room like a quiet, rising tide. Adrian's jaw tightened. "This is not the place." I met his gaze calmly. "Then perhaps you should have reviewed the place where authority is defined." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sharp, observational. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at Adrian. He cleared his throat, face drained of color. "Let's move on." Sabrina clicked to the next slide with trembling fingers. I returned to my seat. No emotion, no visible satisfaction, just a simple understanding settling across the department. They had tried to erase me publicly, but the ink in the contract still spelled my name. As the meeting wrapped and people filed out with sideways glances, I closed my notebook with deliberate care. The undressing had been public, but so was the truth, and the consequences had started to gather around Adrian like unspoken witnesses, waiting for their turn to speak. I didn't go home after the quarterly review. I walked. 2 blocks down from our office, past the overpriced salad bar and the espresso shop where interns like to rehearse their "I'm so busy" narratives, stood a narrow brick building with a lobby no one bothered entering after 5. Property management kept it warm enough, quiet enough, anonymous enough. Perfect. I rode the elevator to the empty 11th floor, a cluster of unused offices the company leased years ago and then forgot about. My badge still opened the suite. They never removed my access to anything that required thought. The hallway lights buzzed to life. Not warm, not cold, just neutral, like the mood I'd been cultivating. I chose the conference room with blinds and a pivoting whiteboard no one had cleaned in months. I set down my bag, plugged in my laptop, and pulled the renewal grant contract from its folder. The pages were crisp, the corner tabs color-coded from the weeks I spent drafting it. People assume power lives in titles. Sometimes it lives in the clauses no one bothered to read. I flipped to section 4.2, tracing the familiar language with the tip of my finger. Primary Program Director, Elena Marlowe. Replacement requires written consent of the current program director. Absence of consent halts all fund disbursements. Compliance oversight must be continuous and personal, not delegated. Continuous and personal. A phrase I'd fought to keep in after legal tried to dilute it. They didn't understand the agency's temperament. I did. I leaned back, letting the words settle like sediment in water. Adrian hadn't just overlooked the details. He had bulldozed over the architecture. And Sabrina, she had walked into a system she couldn't comprehend, wearing perfume where she needed precision. I opened a new document titled Risk Memo, Internal Use. Not a complaint, not an accusation, a record. Every revision to the renewal project since Sabrina's arrival. The unvetted plans she'd pitched, incorrect regulatory metrics, missing compliance steps, Adrian's unilateral reassignment announcement, the inaccurate funding timeline he gave finance. The memo wasn't emotional. It was clinical. The corporate equivalent of a medical autopsy performed on a patient still breathing. At 8:03 p.m., the office Wi-Fi hiccuped, signaling the automated nightly backup cycle. I watched the little cloud icon sync each document I'd saved, each flag I'd noted. My evidence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Noise fades. Documentation remains. I took a break, leaning forward with my elbows on the table. Outside the window, the city glowed with that muted amber light that makes every building look like a diorama. Cars moved in quiet lines. People hurried home with dinner packages and deadlines still clinging to their clothes. I should have been one of them. But the storm in my office wasn't weather. It was architecture. And I knew architecture better than they ever would. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah in finance. FYI, first renewal disbursement queued for Friday. Need your authorization by EOD Thursday. I typed back, hold submission until further notice. 3 dots appeared, paused, disappeared. Finance understood things without needing explanations. I breathed out slowly and returned to the contract, flipping through the appendices, legal opinions, compliance annexes, federal correspondence. I reached the signature page and paused. There it was. My name in ink, not digital. A signature that had weight because it was tied not just to authority, but to accountability. And next to it, the agency's countersignatures, dated, approved, sealed. Adrian had wanted speed. Sabrina had wanted visibility. What neither grasped was that the only thing smoother than a quiet transition is a quiet refusal. At 9:12 p.m., I closed the contract, placed it back into its folder, and powered down the laptop. My decision wasn't a reaction. It wasn't revenge. It was compliance. I would not transfer authority without proper documentation. I would not approve funds without proper oversight. And I would not break federal contracts because a man wanted to impress his new girlfriend. The silence in the room shifted, not empty, but resolved. I gathered my things and walked out, turning off the lights with the same deliberate stillness I'd used in the quarterly review. As the elevator doors closed, my reflection stared back at me. Calm, composed, wholly unafraid. People think the moment of decision is loud, dramatic, cinematic. But mine wasn't. It was a whisper. A single, quiet fact. They could push me out of meetings. They could rewrite org charts. But without my consent, nothing could move forward. And they had already shown how badly they needed Friday's funds. By Thursday morning, the office had developed a strange new weather system. A pressure in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Conversations ended too quickly. Doors closed too fast. And the hum of the workspace carried a nervous, metallic pitch. I arrived at my desk at 8:02 a.m. At 8:07, Adrian appeared in my doorway. He never came to my office. His presence there was a barometer of desperation. "Elena, do you have a minute?" he asked, tone much too polite for someone who'd demoted me by proxy. I closed my laptop with the gentle finality of someone who had nothing to hide. "Of course," I said. He stepped inside and shut the door, glancing back as if expecting someone to follow. For the first time in weeks, he looked like a man trying to solve a problem instead of manufacture one. "There's a situation with renewal," he began. A situation. The corporate euphemism for a crisis wearing a cheap disguise. "What kind of situation?" I asked. He hesitated. "The first disbursement didn't process." I let a quiet moment pass, long enough for him to feel it. "Did finance tell you why?" I asked. "They said something about missing authorization," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "But that must be a system issue. You always sign these things automatically, so—" "I don't," I said calmly. "I sign them when the compliance requirements are met. They haven't been." A flicker of irritation crossed his face, the old Adrian emerging, the one who expected everyone to say yes before he finished the question. "Elena, we need those funds. We have vendor timelines, hiring plans." "And compliance gaps," I said. "You presented metrics that were incorrect. Sabrina skipped her pre-approval checklist, and there's no documented transfer of oversight." He opened his mouth, closed it again. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not withholding it on purpose, are you?" I tilted my head. "I'm following federal protocol. That is my purpose." For a second, he looked genuinely confused, as if he'd never considered that rules could apply to him. Then his expression shifted into something flatter, more calculated. "Sabrina and I will fix the documentation today," he said. "If you can just sign off—" "I can't sign an incomplete submission." He swallowed. "You won't sign it." "Correct," I said. "Not until the program is compliant." Adrian stepped back, pacing once, twice. "You don't understand the magnitude of what's at stake." "I do," I said quietly. "That's why I'm protecting it." He stared at me, searching for the version of me he used to know, the one who worked late, stayed silent, absorbed responsibility like a sponge. He didn't find her. "So this is about the presentation," he said finally. "About Sabrina." I almost smiled. "It's about the contract." There it was, the moment the trap began to close, not because I tightened it, but because he walked straight into it, eyes open. He left my office with a clipped, "We'll talk later." And for the rest of the day, his footsteps echoed up and down the hallway, urgently, inconsistently, like a man trying to outrun paperwork. By afternoon, finance sent me a discreet message. "Audit notified. Board looping in. Keep documentation. S." I sent back a single word. Always. At 4:23 p.m., the panic began. First came a flurry of meeting invites, then an urgent thread demanding status updates, then Sabrina appearing in my doorway with a face drained of its usual color. "Elena, hi, sorry, can you sign the disbursement?" she asked, her smile trembling at the edges. "Adrian says it's just a formality." I met her eyes gently. This isn't personal. She blinked. Then why are you doing this? Because the agency monitors us, I said, and because you skipped steps that could cost us the entire grant. I didn't know, she whispered. I believed her. She had been operating inside a story Adrian crafted, not the system that existed. But sympathy was not a compliance exemption. I documented everything, I said, for the board. The color in her cheeks vanished. She left without another word. At 5:17, Adrian stormed past my office. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He went straight to his office, slammed the door, and 2 minutes later, blinds snapped shut like a stage curtain ending a bad performance. I packed my things slowly, the way one leaves a library after finishing a long, meticulous chapter. As I walked out, I noticed the office had gone unusually quiet. The kind of stillness that signals an entire floor listening for a shoe that hasn't dropped yet. It would drop soon, not because I pushed it, but because systems built on shortcuts eventually collapse under the weight of one unchanged rule. Nothing moves without the proper signature. Mine. By the time I stepped onto the sidewalk and felt the cool evening air settle around me, the truth had crystallized with a precision even I hadn't anticipated. The trap was never mine. It was theirs. I had simply stopped rescuing them from it. By Friday morning, the building felt different. People weren't speaking in normal tones. They were whispering in currents. Screens glowed brighter, chairs squeaked louder, and every office door seemed cracked open just enough to catch passing information. Something was happening, something big, and everyone could feel it. At 9:14 a.m., my inbox pinged with a calendar alert. Emergency Oversight Review, Mandatory Attendance, Attendees, Board Committee, Internal Audit, Compliance, Finance. Required Presenter, Elena Marlowe. Optional, Adrian Rhodes. Optional. The smallest details are sometimes the loudest. I arrived early. Habit, not nerves. The boardroom was cold, overly lit, and smelled faintly of disinfectant. The scent of panic disguised as hygiene. Audit personnel sat stiffly at the far end, laptops open, expressions flat. Finance lined the opposite wall, eyes avoiding mine, but soft with something like quiet gratitude. The chairwoman, a composed woman named Marin Hale, nodded as I entered. "Thank you for joining us, Elena." I took a seat. No notes needed. I'd brought the one thing no one else in the room had brought: the truth. At 9:28, Adrian rushed in, with Sabrina trailing behind him like a fading shadow. His tie was askew. His hair looked uncharacteristically human. He sat across from me, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Marin began. "We've been informed there are issues with the renewal disbursement. Given the scale of the grant, we need clarity. Elena, please walk us through your findings." I opened the folder I'd prepared. Quiet, unadorned, devastatingly precise. 3 weeks ago, I began, I was informed that Sabrina would be leading renewal. The necessary documentation for transfer of oversight was never initiated. Audit nodded. They already knew. They needed it said aloud. Under Section 4.2 of the grant agreement, the primary program director cannot be replaced without written consent. I met Marin's gaze. No such consent was requested. Therefore, legally, I remain the program director. Sabrina exhaled shakily. I continued, placing copies of my notes in front of each board member. Additionally, a review of internal actions reveals multiple compliance breaches. I clicked the remote, projecting a timeline I had assembled over the past week. Misquoted regulatory thresholds, missing pre-approval checklist entries, unvetted vendor assignments, unauthorized reallocation of budget lines, scheduling of resource planning meetings without mandated audit presence, presentation of inaccurate compliance metrics to the entire department. Each point landed like a soft tap of a hammer on glass, quiet, but accumulating fracture lines. One board member leaned forward. "And you documented all of this?" "Yes," I said, "with timestamps, email trails, and version histories." This was not retaliation. This was evidence. Marin spoke next, voice neutral. "Sabrina, is this accurate?" Sabrina's lips parted, but only a whisper escaped. I didn't know. Adrian told me everything was approved." Marin turned slowly toward him. "Adrian?" He straightened his shoulders. "Look, this is being blown out of proportion. Sabrina's new. There were misunderstandings. These things happen." Audit's lead raised an eyebrow. "Federal compliance violations happen?" Adrian's face flushed. "I'm saying we can fix it." "It's already been escalated," Finance added quietly. "The agency contacted us this morning after the disbursement failed. They flagged discrepancies." The room chilled. Even the fluorescent lights felt sharper. Marin looked to me. "Elena, why did you withhold authorization?" "Because the program is not compliant," I answered simply. "Authorizing under these conditions would violate federal guidelines and jeopardize the entire grant." The clarity of it created a small silence, a collective realization that the calmest person in the room was the only one protecting the company. Audit began projecting my documentation on the screen, line by line, timestamp by timestamp. The narrative took shape, not through emotion, but through precision. Adrian's initial smirk dissolved with each slide. He tried once, weakly, to interject. "This is selective." "It's chronological," I said. The room resumed its quiet examination. By the time audit finished, the conclusion was unavoidable. Sabrina had been unqualified. Adrian had bypassed procedure. The grant had been endangered. I had followed the letter of the law. When the final slide vanished, Marin folded her hands. "Thank you, Elena," she said. "You've done exactly what your role required." Her gaze shifted to Adrian. "We will continue this discussion in a closed session. Please wait outside." He stiffened. "I'm the department head." "And I'm the chairwoman," she replied, tone soft as silk and twice as cutting. "Outside, Adrian." He rose slowly, the weight of consequence settling on him like a wet coat. Sabrina followed, head lowered, the heels of her shoes clicking like faint apologies. When the door closed behind them, Marin turned to me. "You've saved us from a regulatory disaster," she said. "We'll inform you of next steps shortly." I nodded. "I'll remain available." "No," she corrected gently. "You'll remain indispensable." As I walked out of the room, every head lifted, not with pity, not with curiosity, with recognition. The unraveling wasn't messy. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. And in corporate worlds, procedural is how empires fall. They kept me waiting only 18 minutes, long enough for the board to deliberate, short enough to signal that there was no real debate, only the administrative cleanup of a foregone conclusion. I sat alone in the smaller conference room across the hall, a sterile glass box normally used for vendor intros and quiet terminations. Today, it felt like a staging area between two versions of the same company. The one that had underestimated me, and the one that would not make that mistake again. At 10:51 a.m., the door opened. Marin stepped in first, followed by the head of audit and the HR director. Not the junior one who sent out company yoga reminders, but the senior one. the only HR representative whose presence ever indicated that decisions had already been cemented. "Elena," Marin said, sitting across from me with a calm I almost respected. "Thank you for your patience." Patience was never the problem. It was the silence that made people uncomfortable. Audit placed a thin folder on the table. It made a sound like a soft verdict. "We've concluded our preliminary review," he said. "Your documentation was meticulous. It aligned with our internal checks and with the agency's concerns." Concerns, a polite word for violations. The HR director cleared her throat. "Effective immediately, Sabrina Mulholland is removed from all program involvement. She will return to her probationary role in non-critical operations." I nodded, expression neutral. I wasn't there for her humiliation. She had never been my target, merely the symptom of someone else's arrogance. "And Adrian Rhodes," HR continued, "has been placed on unpaid administrative leave pending full investigation." There it was, the inevitable collapse. Not with shouting, not with threats, with paperwork. Marin leaned forward. "You were steady, Elena. You did exactly what was required. Nothing more, nothing less. That's rare." It wasn't praise, it was recognition, the kind given only when someone's value becomes undeniable. "We'd like you to resume formal leadership of renewal," she said, "effective immediately, with full authority." "Of course," I said, voice calm enough to be mistaken for indifference. But inside, I felt something settle. Not triumph, not vindication, just alignment, a return to structural integrity. Then came the part everyone in the room expected, but no one truly anticipated. HR's question. "Elena," she said gently, "given what happened, would you like to file a formal complaint? Against Adrian? Against the attempted reassignment? Against any misconduct?" The room held its breath. A formal complaint was a weapon. It could end careers, trigger reviews, freeze promotions, rewrite entire departments. And it would be justified. But justice is not always the same as noise. I folded my hands on the table. "No," I said. HR blinked. "No?" "There's nothing to add," I replied. "I've already submitted the documentation." The most devastating blow in corporate warfare is often the quietest one. They wanted a spectacle, a confession, a narrative, a headline. All they needed was the paper. Marin nodded as if she both expected and admired the decision. "Understood." Audit closed his folder. HR clicked her pen. The meeting was over. As I stood to leave, Marin touched my arm, the briefest gesture of acknowledgement. "Elena," she said softly, "they will remember this." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I walked back through the hallway of glass partitions and forced politeness. People watched me differently now, not with sympathy or curiosity, but with recalculated respect, standing straighter, looking longer, thinking twice. At my office door, I found a small stack of papers someone had placed neatly on the chair. Meeting notes, expense reassignments, an updated org chart with Sabrina's name quietly removed. I hung my coat on the back of my chair, opened my laptop, checked my inbox. Over 20 new messages, from finance, from legal, from the agency itself, all waiting, all depending, all routed to me. The company had remembered who held the structure together. But there was one more piece of unfinished business. I dialed Audit. He answered on the first ring. "This is Elena. I wanted to confirm something." "Of course." "Has Adrian been informed of why the investigation is moving forward?" "Yes," Audit said. "He asked who escalated the concerns. And you told him? There was a brief pause, respectful. We told him the documentation spoke for itself. Good, because in the end, I didn't need to confront him. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need to stand in his doorway and demand acknowledgement. The board had done it for me. The compliance officers had done it. The missing funds, the failed disbursement, the paper trail, all of it had delivered the message far more cleanly than anger ever could. He tried to replace me with someone he could control. He forgot the one thing he couldn't control, my signature. And in corporate law, signatures are louder than revenge. I closed my office door with a soft click, the sound of a chapter finishing itself. The reckoning wasn't dramatic. It wasn't vindictive. It wasn't loud. It was inevitable. The office was unusually quiet on Monday morning. Not the kind of quiet born from productivity, but the delicate hush that settles after a storm has passed and people are still checking the windows for cracks. I walked through the glass atrium with the same measured steps I'd taken for years, though now those steps made people straighten in their chairs. Not stiffly, not nervously, just aware. Recognition works like gravity. Once it shifts, everything in its radius tilts accordingly. On my desk sat a single manila envelope. No name, no note. But I knew who it was from. Inside, a printed copy of the updated organizational structure, approved by the board that morning. My title? Program Director, Federal Initiatives, restored and expanded. A direct reporting line to the Executive Committee. Authority over all agency partnerships. Not a promotion, a correction. Adrian's name was nowhere on the chart. Sabrina's in a modest corner, attached to a role she could not damage. I sat down slowly, letting the paper settle against the surface of my desk. There was a certain stillness to the moment, the kind that arrives not with celebration, but with alignment, the world clicking back into place. At 9:03, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I'm resigning. Wanted you to hear it from me. Adrian. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. His downfall had never required my voice, only my accuracy. I forwarded the message to HR with no commentary. Documentation, always. A knock tapped gently against my office door. It was Sarah from finance, holding 2 coffees. I didn't know how you take it, she said, offering one. So I guessed. It's probably wrong. I took the cup, warmth seeping into my hands. Thank you. She exhaled, hesitating in the doorway. We all saw what you did. I mean, we saw how you did it. Quiet. Clean. I don't think anyone else could have pulled that off without losing their job. Or their mind. I gave a faint smile. Compliance is just consistency. No, she said softly. Consistency is what they expected from you. What you gave them was integrity. She left without waiting for a response. Some truths don't require one. I turned to the window, watching the river trace its path along the edge of the city. Slow, deliberate, unchanged by the buildings that pretended to tower over it. I used to look at that river when things felt overwhelming. But today, it wasn't reassurance I felt. It was clarity. My inbox chimed, messages from the agency, from legal, from 2 separate board members expressing relief. Not gratitude, which fades, but respect, which doesn't. A final note from the chairwoman. Elena, you were right to hold the line. Consider this a new chapter. Marin. I opened the renewal portal, entered my credentials, and navigated to the authorization queue. There, waiting patiently, was the same funding packet that had been rejected 4 days earlier. The system displayed a message. Pending. Program Director verification. Authorized signatory required. Elena Marlowe. There it was. The line everything had come down to. The ink they had mistaken for decoration. The authority they had treated as a formality. I scrolled through the checklist Sabrina had ignored, each item now corrected by compliance teams scrambling over the weekend. Every required document was finally in place. The structure was intact. I picked up my pen. Not a triumphant gesture, not symbolic of victory. Just a signature doing what it was always meant to do. Protect the program I had built from the reckless hands that tried to hijack it. I signed slowly, cleanly, letting each stroke settle into the page. Approved. The system confirmed with a soft green light. Outside my office, life moved on. The tapping of keyboards, the low murmur of teams adjusting to a new hierarchy, the quiet rebirth of respect. I placed the pen down with a quiet tap. The sound was small, almost imperceptible. But to me, it felt like closing a file. Not with finality, but with resolve. Not vengeance, not triumph. Just truth restored to its rightful place. I leaned back in my chair, the morning sun catching the corner of my desk in a narrow golden stripe. People think legacy is built on recognition, or titles, or applause. But mine, I realized, was made of something quieter, stronger. Decisions made with precision, boundaries held without noise, and a signature no one thought mattered until everything depended on it. The funding moved, the program lived, the company learned. And I simply got back to work.